Welcome to Unlocking the Parenting Code. I'm Kathy, and this is the space where we dive into real-life parenting stories. Because let's face it, raising kids today can feel like trying to crack a complicated code. Together we'll explore the ups and downs, share insights, and swap tips that make this journey a little smoother. So grab a cup of coffee, relax, and let's unlock the parenting code together. Today we're talking with Angie Brandt. Angie is a mom with a uniquely diverse parenting journey. As a biological mom, adoptive mom, and former foster mom, Angie has raised children from various backgrounds, including those with exceptional needs. Now a grandmother, she brings valuable insights into the complexities of fostering, adoption, and human design in parenting. Angie, welcome to the show.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
Angie, let's start with your personal parenting story and what challenges you faced, how you navigated that situation, and what you learned. It's possible that someone listening to this episode will hear something in your story that helps them along the parenting road.
Oh, sure. You want me to just jump right in and tell my story?
Jump right in. Yeah.
All right. So before I became a parent, I started working in the autism field. And and I share that because in my professional role, I was working with families, working with children, and felt really well prepared to handle the most challenging of behaviors and circumstances. Shortly after working in that field, I became a biological mom. Um, and so raised her using what I was learning in my everyday practice at work, but also, basing my parenting on what I had experienced as a child, what I watched my friends and family doing. And I feel like for the most part, I was showing up for my daughter the way that a mom should, right? I was attentive and um, really tried to put her needs first and put a lot of focus on fun.
Yeah.
Um, so when she was about 9 or 10, I decided that I wanted to help other kids. I knew that there were so many kids out there who didn't have a situation like my daughter did, where they had stability at home. And I thought, well, we have a home, we're full of love. Why not invite other children into our family? And I knew that that would come with challenges. But again, I felt really well prepared for that. We, I was married at the time and we got licensed as foster parents, went through an intensive training to learn about trauma and attachment. And we had several placements in our home, foster placements. While we had a set of siblings in our home, we were introduced to our son. He wasn't part of the foster system. It was kind of a unusual circumstance or sequence of events, I guess, that led him to our family. And I knew as soon as I met him that he was going to be part of our family forever. I also knew, so once we decided to adopt, we made a decision that bringing more foster children into our home could make it harder for our son to adjust. And so we decided to let our foster license just lapse. We didn't renew it when that time came. And we really put our focus on our son. And I went into parenting him thinking that I had so many tools in my tool belt because of all of my experience in the autism field. At this point, I had just finished up grad school as a speech language pathologist and being a mom. I felt so prepared and all the trauma and attachment training. But my son came to us at 5 with the sweetest smile and really challenging behaviors that everything that I was doing, everything that I knew how to do in my experience, in my training, in the books that I was reading, touching base with my son's, all of the staff that were working with him on all kinds of different things. What I was doing wasn't really working very well.
Mm-hmm.
And so our behaviors in our home and my relationship with my son got to a point where I wasn't feeling safe. I think my son wasn't feeling emotionally safe in our family and when I look back, I couldn't figure out why. I couldn't figure out what was going wrong, right? I was trying so hard. I was getting him involved in all of the different therapies and services through the school. outpatient, different, yeah, lots of services. And some were more of the medical route and some were more of the non-traditional route like acupuncture and things like
Hmm.
that. And while I was doing all these things to try to fix his behaviors, in looking back, this wasn't so apparent then,
Hmm. Yeah.
but in looking back, I realized that my desperate need to fix the behaviors was creating such a wedge in our relationship. And so in my effort to heal my son, to fix the behaviors, I ended up creating such a disconnect between he and I. And I was doing all the things the therapist was telling me to do and telling him that I love him no matter what, no matter how hard you push me away, I'm still going to keep loving you. I was saying all those things, but I don't know if I necessarily believed it because I
Angie,
was seeing so much evidence. Yeah.
so Angie, was
Yeah.
the same behavior apparent at school or was it just at home?
There were behaviors across the board in any environment.
Okay.
However, there were certain relationships um, that would drive me crazy, quite frankly, as mom, because there were certain people in my son's life that didn't see the behaviors. And, it was just a very small handful of people. And I couldn't wrap my head around, you know, I couldn't figure out, is it that he's so successful with that person, or is it that that person is just turning a blind eye to the behaviors?
Hmm.
Which as mom, I would think like, oh, why is it so hard at home?
Yeah.
But yeah, we were definitely having struggles at school as well. Yeah. Um, oh, go ahead.
No, no, I was going to say to you, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your story. So
No,
keep
no.
going on with it.
No, that's great. So so our relationship became so strained. So like I said, he joined our family when he was 5. I didn't kind of mention in the story, but his dad and I ended up getting divorced shortly after that. And behaviors escalated really, I mean, they were apparent pretty early, right after adoption, but they really escalated and got to the point when he was about 13 that he and I really didn't have a like I didn't feel safe with him, and I think he didn't feel emotionally safe with me, which was really hard as a mom, right? We're trying so hard to help our kids, and there was just such a wedge. And the feedback that I would hear from the professionals was, well, you're the mom, right? You're the safe place. They would say, of course he's going to act out with you,
Mm.
which logically, okay, maybe that makes sense. But in practice, when you're the mom who is taking all of the hate and the anger and the behaviors, it's really taxing on a
Yeah.
parent.
Hmm.
So our relationship kind of got to a head, and it ended up being a change in placement where he said he didn't want to be at my home anymore, which was really hard. But when I look back, I think it was probably the best thing that ever happened to our relationship. I think that distance between us gave me time to do the healing that I needed to do so that I could show up for him the way that he needed me to all along, that I
Hmm.
didn't know how when he was younger. So I can talk a little bit about that if you'd like.
So he left, was it temporarily or was it a permanent placement someplace else?
Well, he left my home and ended up moving in with his dad, so my ex-husband.
Okay.
And
Was
so that happened around 15 and he's now 18. So yeah,
okay.
it lasted for the entire, and he changed schools because of that shift. And yeah, so go ahead.
So did he have a diagnosis? Like, did he have like a behavior, I forget, defiant behavior defiant disorder, or is this just, trauma-based um, results of his own story?
Well, so I look at it so differently now, but in in the thick of it, when behaviors were so present, I was on a relentless pursuit to figure out why. And so I had him very thoroughly tested by lots of different specialists. And, each time he was placed in a facility to help, they would add on to the list of diagnoses. So, yeah, he had this whole list
Mm.
of diagnoses of every alphabet soup that you can think of. But when I look at it now and I think I, not that I'm saying that they were wrong, but when I look back at it now and look at the experience that I had with my son, I really truly think that if I had better tools to address the trauma piece in a way that helped me stay connected with him, which is what I help parents with now.
Yeah.
But if I had the right tools to help him then, I don't think any of those other diagnoses would have even um, come to fruition. And I'm not saying that I caused them, but right, for example, like if my son was more regulated, the ability or difficulties with staying focused and staying on task might not have been there, might not have been so present. But he got a label of ADHD because, he really struggled to stay focused and pay attention. And I knew in my mind it was because his cortex wasn't really getting the blood flow, the activity that it needed
Yeah.
for daily tasks because he was in that fight or flight mode often. But that resulted in an ADHD diagnosis or, an oppositional defiant diagnosis. Well, again, if I had better tools to help regulate him and help him build his resiliency keys, of feeling lovable and feeling accepted and feeling worthy, if I really knew that that was my job as mom to help him with those things instead of trying to fix a problem, a diagnosis, I don't know if he would have ended up with all those diagnoses. So, yes, if you look at his medical chart, all kinds of letters,
Mhm.
but I look at it so differently now.
So, so are you saying like if your perspective had have been different, then your reactions or your mindset around it all would have been different than that probably? Because like when you talk about it, when like you had a quite a heavy toolbox going into it. Just like
Mhm.
most people don't have, special education backgrounds or all that kind of or from the fostering the trauma and attachment. Like most people don't have any of those tools initially.
Mhm.
So you already
Yeah.
had. So does that like I'm just thinking out loud here, but does that kind
Yeah.
of mean that if always if always, no matter what was going on, behavioral wise or anything, if always at the core of it was, how am I going to keep connected? How am I going to,
Mhm.
is this going to strengthen or is it going to weaken my relationship? And always emphasizing that part of it, because that's a tool all parents could use, no matter what their
Yeah.
situation is. So is it, like, am I interpreting it right that that would have
Yeah.
been maybe the core of it?
Yeah, absolutely. And in some of the work that I do with parents now, as part of my mindset coaching, before I even added in human design,
Mm.
but one of the key things that I would help parents with is to shift their mindset, shift their thoughts and feelings in the moment when their child was acting out or when they got that call from school or, whatever their trigger was. But, I watch, I look back on how I reacted to things and I watch my clients and how they react to things. And we're so conditioned to think that we need to react to the behavior. What's going to be our consequence? How are we going to teach them right from wrong? And I mean, I feel like such a broken record when I'm talking with my clients when I say they already know that they did wrong. They already know they made a mistake.
Yeah.
They have such a strongly held belief about their wrongness. We don't need to add to that. So when your child is acting out, they go chasing after the dog with scissors, or they scribbled all over their sister's homework, or they're telling you that they hate you, ask yourself, what does my child need from me right now? Look at it through a trauma lens and ask yourself, what do they need? Because they don't need a lecture
Yep.
or a consequence. They need connection.
Yeah. So I think we think very similarly about that. I often say that and I practice it too, is whatever the behavior is, that's just something on the outside. It's not really here nor there. It's like if you really want to support that person, actually, it doesn't even need to be your own child, but if you really want to support that
Mhm.
person, then you have to look what's behind it, what's the emotion, what's missing, like, and really looking at it as a cry for help. And so the
Yeah.
last thing they need is to be isolated or punished. I mean, you still, there's accountability and there's, learning from choices that you've made, but it doesn't have to be something that severs your relationship or makes them feel worse about
Yeah.
themselves. Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's interesting because now um you're still younger than I am, but it's kind of like when you start having older children, the perspective you have, not just of, the different stages a child goes through, but also yourself. So sometimes as
Hmm.
they're getting older, and have found, especially during the adolescence, the early teens, and then moving on through that, that we have such high expectations for things like behavior and to be able to, move into adulthood basically. And especially for our boys, like those expectations were not, and so that's kind of the other thing, like we need to be trying to set them up for success realistically, but not putting expectations for things that they're not yet developmentally able to be successful at. And that doesn't,
Yeah.
that never changes. I can talk for a child who's 31. And it's,
Yeah.
I think sometimes as a parent, the older you get, sometimes if you don't keep your perspective wide open, you can get kind of stuck. So the reaction of, I know more, I'm more experienced, I can point out, where you're going wrong. That again, like just this morning, I said to my husband, I said, well, think about what you're saying. And is this going to bring you closer to your son, or is it going to put a wedge in there? And then make your decision based on that. And
Yeah, exactly.
we'll see the result of that. Okay. So another area that I'd like you just to speak about, because it's something I've always been curious about. So I don't know that everybody could foster. Like I had thought of adoption at one point too, and I thought, oh yeah, I could do this. I don't think, I wonder if you're fostering, if you let yourself, go 2 feet deep with your heart because you know it's not going to last. Like I can see both sides of it, but I wonder, like, how was
Yeah.
it when you were fostering? Because that must be really difficult.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I don't know if I even really thought twice about it. I think that um so I can say going into it, I don't think that I really thought twice about it. I just something nudged me and told me that this was the next step in life. And so I figured out what I needed to do. I convinced my husband that it was a good idea for us.
Hmm.
And off we went. I now the way that I look at things and knowing how important our emotions are in our connectivity with our kids, I you had said before, like you had such a full tool bag. Yeah, I had a lot of tools up in my cortex.
Yeah.
But when I think about the tools to help use my heart to help him, right? Like I was compassionate and calm and patient with the foster kids, with my son. I am not a reactive person. That I knew would be easy peasy for me. It's my personality. Um, but I didn't realize until, probably I was too thick in it with my son that we do put a wall up around our heart to some regard, right? Whether it's with foster kiddos who, we hope that they go back home And I think that some foster parents are so much better designed or prepared
Yeah.
to just fully open their heart to any child and love them unconditionally for
Right.
however long they have them. I think
Mm.
some people are designed that way. I think some people, based on their own experiences, might see it more as like when I look back, I think I looked at it more as like a task I was doing to help a child. But I don't know if I fully understood unconditional love. I don't think that I was
Yeah.
um, I don't think that that's something that was part of my skill set,
Mm.
that unconditional love. And I didn't really understand it. And I'm not saying that I didn't unconditionally love my kids, but to really know what that means when things get tough, because with my daughter, they really didn't get tough, or I didn't let it get to me. But with my son, it did. And that's where I think that things got so hard is that we expect our kids to not tell us that they hate us. We expect our kids to not, steal and lie and cheat and do all of the things. And when that isn't the story, if we don't have another kind of perspective to pull from, it quickly becomes frustrating and we quickly can feel like a failure and put a wall up around our heart, right? Because I don't want to be hurt if something happens and the state takes my son away, or my gosh, like even being an adoptive parent still comes with a little bit of fear of, yes, I'm legally his adoptive mom, but what if there's
Mhm.
some loophole I don't know about, right? That doesn't happen with our biological kids. There's no loophole, like what if they're not ours?
Yeah.
At least not for moms if you delivered your baby.
True.
In
True.
the vast majority of circumstances, I know there are some fluke things like a baby swab at the hospital, but that's so
Yeah.
minute of a chance compared to adoption.
What about something when you were just talking? I wonder if you can help me understand it, is like before I had a child, I had worked with children for, a long time. I was a mature mother giving birth. And I really thought I understood about children, especially young children, because early years was my area of expertise. And I thought, this is going to be fun. Like I'm an older mom, I've sowed my oats, I'm ready for this. And I was quite excited about it. And, but when I was teaching, I thought I understood, and I do think I understood kids, but I had no idea what it meant to be the mom. I had no idea what it meant to have that feeling of a responsibility 24/7, but also the like just wanting to protect them. Protection was one thing. Like I always wanted to make sure, their world was, safe for them. But it was sometimes, all encompassing. This like that is unconditional love. That's the first time I understood that phrase that gets sprinkled over, and the true meaning of it. I think many people don't have the experience. But so even like because biological, he was ours. You are reminded constantly, like he looks something like you, he's talking like you, he's walking like his dad. Like there's all of these, signals that he's come from you. And sometimes
Mm.
that can make it so easy to be very vulnerable to those feelings of guilt, when they make choices that you wish they hadn't made. And it's kind of like, oh, that reflects on me as being a bad mom. And it's quite deep, that feeling of guilt. And
Yeah.
and on the flip side, you want people to see the beautiful little boy that's in there that you see all the time. And so that can be those two emotions can be very hard as a mom. Is there any difference when it's an adopted child that's come in a little bit later, like not from birth?
Yeah. Well, that's such an interesting question. And um, well, I want to touch on the not from birth part because it's so just one little snippet about that is that oftentimes I'll meet families who say, because I'll talk about attachment and what attachment difficulties look like and trauma. And I'll often meet parents who say, but I adopted my child at the hospital. Like the mom delivered and they came home with us and we've been their loving family. They never experienced trauma. they never experienced, that disrupted attachment like you talk about. And I just, it's something that, well, one, there's so much research behind that disrupted placement, even if it's on day one, and how that in and of itself is a trauma. Um, but to touch on those feelings that you talked about, it's so interesting. It's something that I've talked about in my podcast and talk with clients about too, is that um this one part I haven't really talked about, but there is a little bit of that, like, oh, well, that happened before me, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm not responsible so much for that behavior, or, that's part of his biology or whatever that might be. That's an interesting piece of it. But another piece of it that I think a lot about, and I've talked about too, is that when we decide to adopt a child, we make this huge promise to them, maybe to their biological parents, that is different than what we do with our own biological kids, right? I kind of joke, but you can't really accidentally become an adoptive parent. You
Yeah.
can accidentally kind of become a biological parent.
Hmm.
And I know so many parents go into the biological parenting with a lot of thought and planning and sometimes heartache. But adoption always comes with paperwork and a caseworker and, all of these things where there's so many times where you could change your mind. And so when we go through with that adoption, we've made such a commitment to and to really say, like, I'm going to give you a safer place than you had before. I promise to connect with you and love you in a way that I know that you're missing. And for me and other families that I've connected with, that's the part that I think creates so much guilt, is when we make this huge promise, this huge commitment that I know you came from a really, really hard place and I'm screwing it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? That guilt for me was so especially hard because I felt like I promised his mom that I would take good care of him
Yeah.
and love him unconditionally, and behaviors got so, so hard. And
Yeah.
his mom would occasionally call me just to check in. And you know, I was kind of teetered on the fence about, like, do I tell her how really hard it is? Or do I
Mm.
just say, like, no, everything's lovely? But I mean, I remember those phone calls so vividly, and just that struggle, right? Of like, I made such a huge promise to her to love him unconditionally, and I felt like I was failing. So
Did you
yeah, I
ever
don't know if
did,
I
did you ever feel like, and I don't know, you don't need to answer if you don't want to. Did you ever feel like, just in the back of your head, like, not that that thought would stay there for more than a second, but did you ever feel like, my God, what did I do? Like, did I make a
oh yeah.
mistake? Okay.
Oh yeah.
That must be so
Yeah, and
hard.
that is at least with the people that I attract through my coaching
Hmm.
and on my podcast, I think. But it's a really common theme actually with adoptive parents who are struggling, is feeling regret and
Hmm.
resent are two really big feelings that I think are, at least my experience, is more common in the adoption world than in the non-adoption world.
Yeah.
Because yeah, it's such a big decision, and in so many cases can be so incredibly harder than we ever imagined.
What do you wish that more people understood about adoption and fostering?
Hmm. That is a lovely question. I wish that more people going into fostering and adoption had a better understanding about trauma, and to really look at every single behavior through the lens of trauma, not just the ones that look like trauma behaviors,
Hmm.
but every single one. Because when we can really train ourselves to respond to our child's trauma needs instead of reacting to the behaviors, we show up in such a more connected way. Because, right, like, who am I to decide if, when my son today is, I don't know, stabbing holes in the wall, who am I to decide if today, oh, that's a trauma behavior, but tomorrow, no, 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 he's just misbehaving, right?
Yeah.
I that that I guess would be my biggest tip to foster and adoptive parents is that to look at everything through the trauma lens, and then also to know that the solution is in your heart and it's not in your head.
Hmm. What about how important, like I kind of think all parents should look at this, but how important do you think it is for a parent to look at their own traumas and their hidden areas where something could trigger something that if we worked on it and healed ourselves first, that we would be more able to support, the children that were, in their world.
Yeah, that is also such a hot topic too. I follow some, well, many different adoption related groups and things like that. And it's a topic that comes up in the adoptee community is that question of why didn't my parents work through their own trauma before bringing me into their family? Right?
Mhm.
And from the child's perspective of you're not going to fix your trauma by bringing in a child who's experienced trauma. That's not the solution for the parents. And man, in an ideal world, if parents could be more forthcoming with their own trauma, work through that, and be healed before becoming an adoptive parent, they would be so much better able to show up for their kids. I can say, though, I mean, for myself personally, when going through the foster licensing process, I had experienced ugly things in my past, but as I was filling out that application, I convinced myself, well, those things are in my past and they're not impacting me, and I've moved on. But they sure did resurface when
Mhm.
behaviors got hard.
Yeah.
And so I don't know exactly what that right tool is because I think like the process to become a licensed foster parent was very grueling. And I still was able to just say like, no, 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 that
Yeah.
those things didn't happen to me. So yeah, that's such a valid question is making sure that parents have done the work that they need to do before bringing kids into their home.
Or even the awareness that maybe there's work to do.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I've said to so many people that if I had the say, I would require that all pre-foster and adoptive parents work with a mindset coach who understands trauma to help them work through their trauma, create a new mindset, and to be able to show up for their kids. A therapist might also be part of that, but I can say for myself that I was like, no, 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 I don't need therapy. That's not for me. But
Yeah.
working with a mindset coach, I was able to work through so much more. And now some of the tools that I've learned with human design and EFT, man, I'm able to work through things that I wasn't willing to
Yeah.
with with more traditional modalities.
Yeah, a little bit differently, but some similarities. I feel the same way. If I could, wave a magic wand, I would want all parents to um, assess their unconscious biases around gender, particularly for little boys, if they're raising little boys. Because if you don't have the awareness of what you're bringing to the picture, then you're
Mhm.
probably going to perpetuate it or, go against it, whatever your mode of
Yeah.
operation is. But yeah. What about, like you said, you had training for autism and you have your speech therapy um, certification or whatever that is. What about because there's so many children are getting diagnosed, like there's an abundance, and I only know that really because of working in education for like 45 years. And the difference between the time when I started, which I honestly I would think the biggest diagnosis at that time, and it was frightening if a parent got it, was dyslexia. That was almost the
Mm.
only thing that I can remember um, impacting a young child's education. So today, with so many parents, having to deal with a variety of diagnoses, and you said like your son had a variety that kept getting added onto. From the perspective you're at now, what words of wisdom, if a parent is going through this, a little bit baffled, trying to do the best they can, like what words of wisdom could you kind of just give them to hold on to?
Yeah, I look at things so differently now than I used to. I mean, I even feel differently now about an autism diagnosis is that I work in early intervention. I work with families who are, at first they're concerned that their child isn't talking, but as we work with them more and more, sometimes at that first meeting, they're questioning autism. And had you asked me 5 years ago, I would have said, like, yeah, go get a diagnosis, get that answer, get them into therapy. And now when parents are bringing concerns to me or I'm noticing things, I'm having a conversation with them about, would it help you to make different decisions about how to help your child if you knew that it was autism causing, the lack of speech, or if it was something else? And that is my advice in general for parents is that will that diagnosis help you make better decisions about how to help your child? Or is it, do you feel obligated to get that diagnosis? Or do you feel like it will give you clarity about what's wrong with your child? Because if you're looking, and I say that with all of the love in my heart, because I was there, but if you're looking for a label for what's wrong with your child, it's still not going to help you connect with them any better. And so that when I think about testing, diagnosing, ask yourself questions about what will change when I get this diagnosis. Will I get them into a specific therapy? Will I teach them differently? Will I respond to them differently? To ask yourself better questions about what comes from it.
A lot of parents that that I see, and it's usually like in kindergarten, grade one, like those are the years that because the child isn't settling into the institutionalized system, as is expected. And for many parents, they are torn between they don't want their child labeled. Like that's one of the biggest thing. But on the other side, it's like if the child needs to have special accommodations, they want the school to be adaptable enough to recognize that there are some, you know, extra ways that they could be supporting this child. So it's a really, and that's apart from just the parent-child relationship. Those are really tough decisions for a parent to make.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and, I had kind of mentioned this too, but understanding human design, which is a whole other big topic, but you had kind of touched on this a little bit, is that if we're trying to get a diagnosis to figure out why our child doesn't fit in this box, this educational system, the way that it's designed, I again go back to are they supposed to fit in that box? Because, so an example, whether or not your listeners understand human design or not, but human design is a way that it's linked to astrology and the chakra system and the Judaic Kabbalah and the I Ching and quantum physics. And it's a way of looking at our unique energy blueprint. So I didn't know this until maybe the past 2 years I've been learning about it. But when I think about my son, for example, where yes, he came to our family with a history of trauma, difficulties attaching, but he also would try this and try that and, try this thing and fail at that. And he was constantly like restarting, whether it was with friendships or with, interests in what he wanted to play. But he was constantly what would seem like trialing something and making a mistake, trial something, make a mistake. But now knowing his human design, he actually has a huge part of his design that he's supposed to be the experiential learner. It's part of his
What is he?
design. Um, well, he's a projector,
Me
but
too.
his design, oh, I love it.
Mhm.
Um, but his profile has a 3 in it, and that 3 is the experiential part, right?
Yeah.
And so it is a strong part of his design that he's supposed to be experimenting in life to learn. And it's not a bad thing. But as a parent raising a child who, one, has the energy of a projector, so doesn't like to do chores, doesn't like to, like he might start doing something, but then always had an excuse why he couldn't finish it.
Yeah.
Um, and he has this experiential part of his design. So to a parent, it can look like a child who is lazy, he's not listening, he's being oppositional defiant because he's not doing what I asked him to, and he keeps getting into things and, like making all these mistakes is what it can look like to a
Yeah.
parent who doesn't understand human design. But now knowing his design and looking back, I think like, oh my goodness, I could have responded to him so differently and saw that what could look like faults to a parent or look like a kiddo who doesn't fit well in the school system, he was actually just living out his design and being exactly who he's supposed to be. And when I know that about him now, he's 18 and I'm helping him tap into his gifts, and
Hmm.
it's beautiful. And he's so excited to learn more about how to really um, fulfill his purpose as a projector
Yeah.
and to experiment. Like I've watched him, he was 18 and he's jumped from job to job to job to job. And it would be so easy to say like, wow, why haven't you figured this out? What is your, you need to pick a job and stay with it. We're so conditioned to think that we're supposed to look at things in a certain way.
Hmm.
But I just keep saying like, oh, what did you learn from that experience? How are you going to carry that into the new job, And without any judgment at all. It just makes it so much easier to just show up for him because I see him in a way that I couldn't before.
I think it's really exciting that there are like I don't like labels like because there's a negative connotation that we tend to have about labels, but I love that we're in a time where there is more understanding and more research done that is letting us know that there is a reason that we're not all the same, and that even if you're different, it doesn't mean that it's wrong, and that maybe that difference really is your superpower. Um, it's only been the last few years for me too to understand a little bit. I only understand a little bit, but I was so excited when I found it because as a projector, that's only about 20% of the population. So I always thought I was just strange. Like, I was different. I didn't quite belong here, like all that kind of stuff. And then on top of that, I'm also highly sensitive. So when I found in human design that my sign was a projector, it's like, my God, there's 20% of the people who are the same. And there was this, like, it just changed everything in my head. It's like, maybe it is a superpower. Maybe it's not something I am lacking because I'm not like the other 80% of the population. So I
Yeah.
think parents, that the more tools that you have in understanding your child, like one of the things like with human design was how do you know if you're not aligned or whatever? And for me,
Hmm.
the one thing it said um, helped me understand how I create problems in my life when I do A instead of B. And if I just flip it and do B first, you know, and it was quite
Hmm.
amazing. So I know there are many podcasts out there about human design, and I would encourage parents to look into it just for yourself and also for your children, like to try to understand. It's like when love languages first came out. There's all
Yeah.
kinds of little information you can take that is just going to help you see how individualized we all are. But, once
Yeah.
we realize that we're not putting people in, in the boxes or whatever.
Yeah. 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 Absolutely.
Let me see. I do have a few more questions here. How would you define success as a parent?
I would define success as a parent as being connected. And I think that that looks like our kids trusting us with their emotions trusting us with their vulnerability, and us helping our kids feel capable and empowered.
Yeah. Yeah. Good answer. Before I go on to the final last two questions, is there anything that you'd like to share that we haven't talked about yet?
I don't think so. No.
All right. So for fun, what would be the title for a movie about your family life up to this point? And then what would be a short summary or a synopsis for the movie?
Oh man, a title for a movie. I think I was supposed to prepare this ahead of time, but I did not.
Well,
So,
that's good. Then it'll be right off the top of your head. That's good. You can
I
make up
mean,
a title.
that's making me think like unprepared parenting. There's my title. And I think a short synopsis would be that even when we think we have all of the right tools in our toolbox, um, sometimes there's a little bit more to learn to really show up for our kids.
I think always there's
Mhm.
something to
Yeah.
learn. Yeah. All right, for the final question, imagine you sharing some wonderful wisdom with your child at the moment that they are bringing their own child into the world, whether it's birthing a child or adopting a child. What would be your words of wisdom for them about parenting?
Hmm. Well, that's an interesting one. I have two granddaughters now, so I've had
Ah,
so many words of wisdom already. Um, but the one thing that I often say to my daughter when it comes to parenting is to trust her own intuition about what her girls need, because whether I conditioned her to do this or society did, I see that today's parents are so conditioned to think that all of the answers for their kids are outside of them somewhere.
yeah.
And I know we're here on your podcast providing tips for parents, but I hope that the listeners really leave and ask themselves better questions about how to show up for their own kids, right? Like my, I feel like my role is to provide the questions for you to ask yourself
Hmm.
so that you can show up for your kids the way that your kids need you to, not the way that I need you to or you need them to, but
Yeah.
the way that your kids do. And so that is something that comes up so often in my interactions with my daughter. She'll say, Mom, what do I need to do about this? And I always say, I don't know. What do you think that your girls need? And she'll say, I don't know. That's why I'm asking you. Okay, I'll give you some ideas, but first, if you did know, what what would you do for your daughter right now? And asking her that question, she's tapping into her intuition. She's um, you know, listening to what she needs for her girls because her daughters are not my kids, they're
Yeah.
hers.
Yeah.
And so really helping to empower her to to figure out what to do for them.
I think maybe that's one of the biggest things for parenting, right? Especially right now, because there's so much information out there. There's, you
Hmm.
know, I like thinking of it that, because some people want to learn, like I'm that type. I want to learn. I'll read everything I can about a certain topic that I'm really interested in. But it's really important for people to understand that you can take in all this information or take the things out of the information that resonate with you. But the bottom line has to be the intuition. It has to be what feels right inside and the knowing that you are doing the right thing for your children and that you know that it's the right thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And to not doubt yourself.
That's a hard one, isn't it?
Hmm. Yes.
That's sometimes where coaches really, like I'm not plugging for coaches, but that's sometimes really where coaches can be very effective because you can help someone believe in the choices that they're making. And I don't know that we, in a normal everyday life, we have that so often. People are more apt to be giving you their advice on how you should be
Yeah.
doing it. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. They sure are.
Well, Angie, thank you so much for sharing your time today. I know how precious time is, so I'm very grateful for that. And I love the information that you were able to give. I know that there's a bunch of golden nuggets in here for people who will be able to tune into this because they need to hear what you've said. So thank you very much for joining me today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was such a lovely talk.
Thank you.
If you're a parent raising a boy in today's complex world, be sure to explore sonhoodcoaching.com. You'll discover expert guidance and support designed to help you unlock your full parenting potential. As Amelia Gambetti says, this job is too difficult and too beautiful to do alone. Together we can explore this adventure and discover the magic of raising boys.